My name is Pascal. I'm 22 years old now, but this event happened 3 years ago when I was 19. It happened in the middle of the night when my parents were away for an important company meeting. The company was kind of far away from where we lived, so I stayed home by myself while they were gone. One time, while I was at home alone, I looked out the window randomly and froze. There was a tall man, almost dressed entirely in black. He was wearing a tuxedo and holding a kitchen knife. This guy was standing right outside of the door, looking at me. He wasn't laughing at all, and his head was twitching continuously. "Sir, please get off our property, otherwise I'll call the police." I opened the window and told him. Then the man replied, "Oh, you can do that if you want, as long as you don't look away." Because of this strange attitude, I felt anxious, so I grabbed my cell phone and called the police. But when I looked out the window again, he was gone. At that very moment, I heard footsteps coming from downstairs. I suddenly remembered that I forgot to lock my garden door, so it was still open. I thought I was gonna die at first, but then I pulled myself together. I got my bat and looked down the stairs, slowly, trying not to make a sound. There he was. He was just staring at me. He didn't move but said, "I told you not to look away." A few moments later, we heard sirens. The man still did not move. But then he suddenly changed his mind and walked over to me. I tried to swing my bat towards him, but I was so scared. I couldn't do anything except scream. The police broke down the door. One policeman tried to arrest him, and the other one tried to take the knife away from him, but the man resisted. He was strong. Even though he was outnumbered, they couldn't stop him. They threatened to shoot him in the foot, but he didn't care. Furthermore, he attacked the two policemen, and they tumbled down to the ground. I ran to one of the rooms and slammed the door shut, but he kicked in the door. When the door opened, I could see his face, and I will never, ever forget that moment. However, at that very moment, the police caught up to him and shot his foot. The guy started screaming in pain. Shortly after that, he managed to jump outside of a window and disappeared. The policemen chased after him, but unfortunately, they failed to arrest him. I never saw that guy again. I'm glad that I survived that incident, but I also feel nervous that he'll come to my house again. From that day on, I always made sure I locked all the doors and windows.
When I was a teenager, I would often explore the deep web with my friends, specifically weird stuff on Hidden Wiki. There were definitely a lot of links to choose from. I never clicked on the violent links because I'm not into that. My friend Latrice told me to click on one that says new best friend. After doing so, it takes you to a page where you have to make a profile. I put the name Lisa on my profile. My real name is Susan. Once I made the profile, you are directed to a main page that has categories. They were silly, serious, smart, and smothering. We clicked smothering. I thought it was funny. After choosing, there was a list of people with their pictures, male and female. I clicked on the profile of a guy that had the name 5, like the number 5. I entered, and it didn't seem like someone who would be a smothering friend. When I was searching through his profile, I received a message from him asking if I were looking for a friend. I looked at Latrice, and she laughed, but also told me to respond yes. So we're messaging back and forth for maybe 30 minutes, and then Latrice had to go. I told him I'll be back on tomorrow, and he said okay. Maybe a week went by where I would talk to him every night. He seemed very nice, so we exchanged numbers so we could talk more. Everything seemed fine until I clicked on another profile and someone else messaged me. I started talking with this other person, but still was texting the guy 5, which I knew his real name now as William. The new guy had the name Bill on his profile. A day went by, and he seemed cool, but then William randomly asked me why I was talking with Bill. I didn't know what to say, so I never responded. He kept texting with angry messages, so I blocked him. I didn't receive any texts, only a single message on that site, and it said soon. One day after school, my friend Latrice came over to have a sleepover. We got comfortable, went to my room, and did our usual of surfing through the web, being nosy. I brought up that guy. Then I received a text message that said, "Why'd you block me?" from a random number. I replied with a question mark. Then it replied, "It's me, William." He texted me from another number after I blocked him. I told Latrice how creepy this guy is. Then Latrice stopped me from talking because she thought she heard something. Then I heard a voice. "I'm not that creepy." We both responded by screaming and looking around. I saw someone coming from under my bed, so we ran screaming out of my room, and my mother called the cops. They didn't get him because he left through my window, and nothing could be traced back to him. I'm starting to think that he was both of the people I was talking to. That definitely opened my eyes to the dangers of the internet. I will never visit the dark web again.
A few years ago, me and my family went on our yearly holiday to Madeira, which is the birthplace of my parents. It was pretty normal for us to go annually, as our grandparents were living there. We would sleep in one of our grandparents' home, and during the day, we would go to festivals. If you do not know much about Madeira, then this story will probably give you a better idea. It's not that a physical thing occurred that holiday. It was just this nightmare that became very real for me as a child. As I said before, I was staying at my grandparents' house while in Madeira. I had a room to myself on the upper floor. It was pretty creepy since my grandmother loved Victorian-style dolls. Once I was able to fall asleep, I had a creepy dream that I can't forget. I woke up, and from my bed, I could hear movement on the floor. I looked down to see that the floor was covered in black insects, just crawling around. I could not see the almond brown wood floorboards, and began to yell for help. Someone opened my door, and I saw my little brother come in, but behind him was a woman in a hideous purple dress. I never saw this woman before, but before my brother even came closer to me, I saw the woman force her hand into his back and tear out his heart. I remember screaming in the dream, and all the woman said was, "Your parents aren't here." And I woke up. I was so scared that I went into the next room where my brother should have been asleep, but because it was dark, I couldn't see him. Well, I was a dumb kid. My anxiety level rose even higher. I ran out, went downstairs, and none of my parents were around. I started to panic more because of what that lady in my dream said, and I started to cry even more. Then I heard my older brother call my name from up the stairs. The stairs I just ran down. I told him I had a bad dream, and he stayed in my room after showing me that my little brother was snoring away in his bed. The next morning, my brother told my parents how I behaved, so my mother asked me what happened. I told her about the dream with the lady in the hideous purple dress. My mother's face became serious, and she looked worried. I didn't know why, since that was unusual for her. About 2 years later, I was going through my parents' wedding album in our home in Madeira, while I was sorting out the top floor of the house with my younger brother. I noticed that one of the pictures was ripped in half. I thought it was unusual, so I began looking through to see where the other half was. It wasn't in the album. I brushed it off. About an hour later, I was going through one of the drawers in the living room cabinet. I saw this picture of a woman in a purple dress. She looked almost identical to the woman in my dream. It was the same dress. I began to get goosebumps, so I put the album on top of a table and opened it to the page with the teared up picture. I began to shiver once the tear of both pictures fit perfectly well together. With worry, I began to ask my mother who was in the image. All I know to this day is that she is perceived as a witch and fled with my maternal uncle from Madeira soon after the whole community began to believe it. This is possibly all just a coincidence, but it does send a shiver down my spine. I've never met this woman, but she appeared in my dreams. I have no idea on whether or not I will forget the specific details of that dream, especially since I found out more about this woman, who is my aunt-in-law.
This happened about 5 years ago. I was 11 years old and it was pretty early in the morning. I was in the backyard playing basketball with my younger brother before I headed to school. We had a basketball hoop in our backyard. Our backyard was located next to an alley, and our gate was pretty short, so anyone who walked through that alley could see right into our backyard. After playing for a bit, we noticed that two strange men in the alley were checking out our neighbor's backyard. I didn't feel safe around them, so I led my brother back into the house. We were going to ignore them, but after eyeing them a little longer, my suspicion about them turned out to be right. Watching them from the window, I saw one of them hop right over our tiny gate and was now in our backyard. Then we rushed to go tell our mom. My mom went straight outside to see two strangers standing in our backyard. She yelled at them angrily and told them to go away. She called 911, but they ignored her and didn't leave. One of the men just stared at us. All of a sudden, he went into the shed we had in the backyard and pulled out a lawnmower that was inside. At first, we were all confused and we thought they might be trying to steal it. Then my sister started to record the incident, thinking it might scare them, make them run away. But it didn't work. My mom called 911, and the men weren't saying anything to us. But one of them seemed to have changed his mind and was trying to convince the other man that they should just leave. Then the man who pulled the lawnmower out of the shed turned the lawnmower on. We were totally confused at that moment. A random stranger just comes into our backyard and completely ignores everything we say to him. Why would he go into our shed, pull out a lawnmower, and turn it on? I mean, it doesn't make any sense. However, his next move made even less sense and was even more insane. He flipped the lawnmower upside down and just stood there looking at it. A few seconds later, our confusion soon turned to horror after watching what happened next. He dived headfirst into the spinning blade of the lawnmower, which cut his neck wide open and ended his life. All this happened in the blink of an eye. My mom screamed at the top of her lungs, which frightened the 911 operator. I couldn't believe what I just saw. I was only 11 years old at the time, but it must have been even harder for my younger siblings to watch that happen. A few minutes later, the ambulance and the cops arrived at the backyard. The police came by to ask a few questions, but the video my sister took had the whole incident on video, so the cops knew the story was legit. I couldn't help but feel bad for the other man that was with him. When the incident happened, he screamed too, started crying and begged us to call for help, but it was already too late. I didn't go to school that day because I was in shock. After that, I couldn't sleep at all. I had nightmares for a while. I wished we'd never saw that and wondered what happened to that man to make him want to end his life. I also couldn't stop thinking about our lawnmower. It was old and worn out. You needed to pull the cord multiple times, and with some luck, it might turn on. But he pulled that thing once and it started right up. Everything was odd that day.
This happened to me when I was 17 years old. I live in Canada, and this situation took place during a snowstorm at around 9 p.m. It was extremely dark outside, and I was waiting inside a bus stop shelter after my part-time job to get home. Although I live in a crowded city in Toronto, it was very quiet that night, and there were barely any cars on the road due to hazardous weather conditions. I was waiting all by myself for about 10 minutes until one man who looked like he was in his 50s entered the shelter. He had a disgusting smirk on his face, which made him a bit creepy looking, and that pretty large guy started making small talk with me. He had a creepy low voice, and he kept asking me what I was doing out in this weather and where I was going. I was feeling anxious, but there was only me and that man, so I told him I was going home after work. He smiled and said to me that the buses are going to be delayed because of the weather and won't be coming in for a really long time. I took out my phone to check the bus times. However, due to the deadly cold weather, my phone died completely. Then he came closer to me. He smelled awfully disgusting. "Hey, you want to come with me for 5 minutes?" he said. I said, "I'm sorry, sir. What do you mean?" He said, "Let's go hang out for a bit. Don't worry, you won't miss your bus. I will bring you back safely. Come on." I wasn't stupid and was aware of pedophiles, so I stepped back and refused. But he kept insisting that I should go with him. I was so afraid that he would do something bad to me. However, luckily, one lady came into the shelter, and the man immediately closed his mouth. After waiting for some time, the bus finally arrived. It was me, the lady, that creepy man, and 2 other people on the bus. He sat all the way at the back of the bus where he could watch me clearly, and I noticed that he kept staring and staring. I was so nervous, and when it was my stop, I got off along with the lady. And as I kept walking, I saw that the man got off with us and was right behind me. I freaked out and thought there was no choice at all, so I grabbed the lady's arm and asked her if she could walk me home because a man was following me. She also noticed that the guy was acting strangely, so she whispered that she would take me home. I walked with the lady, and when I looked back, he stared at me for a while and disappeared. When I arrived home, my parents and I thanked that lady repeatedly, and after that, I never saw him again in my life.
I work as a nurse in a hospital, although I can't reveal exactly where because of privacy reasons. Recently, a fairly popular celebrity came to be treated here, although I can't reveal who due to the aforementioned privacy reasons. Honestly, I was pretty surprised he was coming here. Not to shit talk my place of employment, but this place has a bit of a record of being really bad in caring for people. Not that I'm a bad nurse or anything, it's just that a lot of the surgeons seem to fuck up their job and not get fired for some reason. This made it all the more confusing to me that this celebrity came here for surgery to remove a late-stage brain tumour. Speaking of, my friend Patricia was a huge fan and really wanted to be the one assigned to him post-surgery. She was even thinking of asking him for an autograph, which seemed unprofessional to me. Anyway, he was flying in for treatment tomorrow, but my current job was to assist a surgeon with the surgery of a little boy who swallowed a bunch of his toy marbles. I was surprised they decided to opt for surgery though, because they were previously recommended to wait for him to pass them. It was me, the anesthesiologist, and the surgeon in the room. I was staying nearby to the site of the surgery, and everything seemed to be going well. Then, the surgeon slipped and cut the kid's stomach lining open. It was horrific. The smell of stomach acid almost made me vomit as it began to dissolve his intestines. Despite our best efforts, he was dead within 10 minutes. What disturbed me was how unfazed the surgeon was. After we failed to save him, the surgeon left to break the news to the parents almost immediately after. I thought I heard the anesthesiologist mumble something under her breath, but I couldn't understand clearly. It was something about food. My shift was over though, and I walked to the subway to grab some dinner, then caught the bus home. I was pretty tired, so I watched some Netflix in bed until I fell asleep. That night I had a dream, or more accurately, a nightmare. I was in the hospital, and that kid was there in front of me. Only his whole body was hollow and his chest cavity was opened and bloody. His eyes were gone too, but still, he stared at me, and the entire time he pointed straight down. I finally woke up, and with relief from being free of that dream and more guilt from the failed surgery, I started my day. I got to work and Patricia was fairly bubbly. She spent almost the whole morning talking my ear off about the celebrity. When he finally came in, she started freaking out and tried to walk up and talk to him. His bodyguards pushed her away though, and she returned to her duties dejectedly. Just before my lunch break, I was called into my supervisor's office. He said he had something very important for me to do, and that it needed to be done ASAP. He told me to go to the transplant center and get 10 hearts, then go to the basement. I was pretty confused and wanted to ask some questions, but he cut me off and yelled,
"Either you can do this shit right now, or you can walk out and kiss your job goodbye."
I was pretty pissed. He would fire me daring to ask a question, but the management would avoid firing the incompetent surgeons even though they should. I left in a huff to go collect the organs, and found them waiting in a case there already, with a note signed by the doctor that gave me access to a restricted room in the basement simply called Room 60. I didn't have the slightest clue what was in there, and marched onwards to the elevator and went down to the basement. I walked to Room 60 and showed the security guard my note. He looked me over and said, "Oh, this is your first time doing this, huh? I feel sorry for you. Try not to panic if you know what's good for you." He then unlocked the door, and I stepped in. Immediately I was hit with a smell I would describe as rotten eggs, pennies and a corpse. The ground was slick with something and it was dark in there too, with only one dim overhead light. The room was pretty big, and in the middle I saw some nondescript blob. Then I heard what sounded like a deep breath in, and the blob started moving. The thing, which I now started to realise was a body, was walking towards me with stumpy, fat legs. I screamed and tried to run away, but I slipped on the ground. As my face got smeared in it, I realised the stuff on the floor was blood, and as I turned onto my back, I was face to face with the thing. It looked like a very pale, morbidly obese man, although it was much taller and much fatter than any human could be. It had large curled horns, as well as no mouth. Instead, where its mouth should be, there was just a row of pitch black, pointy, needle-like teeth surrounding a hole. It paid me no heed, and reached out to pick up the box of organs. It opened the box, and ate all the hearts in handfuls, stuffing 3 at a time in its mouth. I was terrified and ran out the door, slamming it shut behind me. The security guard looked me in the eyes and put a reaffirming hand on my shoulder. He looked like he wanted to say something but couldn't. He told me that he would walk me out of the building, and that I could have the rest of the day off. Now I'm at home, still shaking and typing this up. I got a text from Patricia, and apparently the celebrity's surgery was a massive success. I'm wondering what I even do now. Is this the type of thing I can report? Would anyone believe me?
This happened when I was about 11. My 2 friends and I, all of us male, were swimming in my friend's backyard one night around 10 p.m. My friend's house borders the junior high school property and is separated by a chain-link fence. As we were swimming, I look over and I see a tall man dressed in black and a baseball cap, just standing there like a zombie, just watching us. For some reason, I didn't get scared. I just thought it was weird. I mention him to my friends, who both look over and immediately start screaming their heads off and start swimming away to get out of the pool. Their reaction woke me up to the situation, and I started swimming out of the pool too. We are one by one trying to use the ladder, and I was in the rear, so as I'm waiting, I look over and the guy is scrambling up the fence as fast as he can. We made it to the house and managed to slam the door and lock it just as he reaches the door. This was the back door, which was like 80% clear glass, so he just stood there looking at us as we screamed our heads off. I even noticed he was holding a baseball bat. We run and hide behind the living room couch, and he keeps jiggling with the doorknob. But luckily, he never used the bat to break the glass, which would have been really easy. He walks away and my friend runs and turns the security alarm on and calls his dad, who was off running errands. My friend's dad said he was almost home and to stay inside. We turn the TV on and start to calm down, when all of a sudden, the alarm goes off. I almost shit my swimming suit for the second time, and our stupid 11-year-old minds decide just standing there screaming was the best option. My friend's dad happened to get home while this is happening. He gives the operator the secret password that everything is okay, grabs his gun and searches the property, but he didn't find anyone. We still swam at night after that, and we never met that crazy guy again. Also, I'm 25 now, and I don't know why we didn't just call the cops or why my friend's dad didn't call the cops.
This happened around the year 2011 when I was 13. One day my friend was planning on throwing a party at his place, so my older cousin drove me there. It took about 4 hours to get there, and when I finally arrived, it was around 8 p.m. A few hours later, we were having fun, but out of nowhere, I had to use the bathroom really badly. About 5 minutes had passed, and while I was in the bathroom, I heard a crunching noise coming from the woods. At first, I thought it was someone who arrived late to the party, but all of a sudden, I heard loud banging on the glass. I started to think it might be my friend just looking for me, so I told him that I was inside the bathroom. However, it wasn't my friend. It was a guy who looked like he was in his late 50s. He said that his car broke down. He then asked me to help him, but I was already paranoid about strangers, so I simply told him that I couldn't help him. He nodded his head and walked away. When I was done using the bathroom, I went back to the room where my friend was. I told him what I saw and what the man said to me. My friend looked like he just saw a ghost. Then he finally said that for almost 2 months, this man was stalking his entire family and also saw him from the bathroom window tons of times. They asked the police to check their area several times, but they couldn't help his family. When he said that, I thought he was overreacting until I heard the same banging noise now coming from the door. It was more violent now. Everybody paused what they were doing and looked at the door in shock. One guest broke the silence and said it was probably only the pizza delivery man. But my friend told me not to answer the door at all costs. I looked through the peephole, and there he was, the same guy I saw through the bathroom's window. He had a psychotic-looking face and was licking his lips nonstop. We all just stood there in silence and hoped that the man would go away. But after a few minutes, the loud noise came from the basement. The guy threw a brick at the basement's window and crawled through it. Suddenly, it sounded as if a gunshot echoed through the entire house. My friend and most of the partygoers screamed and ran out of the house. I stayed behind along with a few others. One of the older kids was trained in martial arts, so I saw him assault and attack the man until he was shot. Afterward, the man escaped and ran into the woods. The whole scene was chaotic now. An ambulance and police car arrived soon after, and fortunately, the kid that was shot survived. After a few days of intense investigation, the police went to my friend's house and told him that they caught the guy. It turns out that he was living in the woods. He also kidnapped 3 kids, but luckily they were found in time and set free. But they also found out that he had already killed a few kids already. So after that, he was condemned to death for murder.
This happened a while back when I was 11. We used to live in a 2-story house with the second floor being a wooden floor. There's a slight crack on the floor, so if anyone steps on it, it creaks. And one night, I woke up at around 1 a.m. The moment I opened my eyes, I heard heavy footsteps behind me as my body was facing the wall. My bed was next to the wall, and my computer was by my head. My door was always open since I never close it when I go to bed. At first, I was confused about why there were heavy footsteps with chains dragging on the floor. The heavy steps sounded as if it stepped on the floor's crack. I heard the floor creak. The footsteps seemed to fade away to the end of the hallway to my uncle's room. It creeped me out and I couldn't move my body. I just stared at the wall in fear, then closed my eyes. Soon after, that noise came back to my room slowly. I heard the creak again, and all of a sudden, the chains whipped the floor door. That sound was so loud, so I opened my eyes for a few seconds in fright, but closed it again. I said to myself that it was all a dream, and it was nothing. It became silent until I heard a loud smash on the keyboard that's right by my head. I screamed, but kept closing my eyes forcefully. Suddenly, one of the deep voices started murmuring loudly just above my head. Its sound was so low beyond recognition, so I couldn't understand what the thing was. Then I started to pray to God. I was not honest and trustworthy back then, but praying was the only way to erase my fear. So I kept praying, and surprisingly, the voice faded away. The next day, I told my family about what happened, and they were surprised. I was given a rosary by a relative as protection, and she told me not to take it off. So ever since then, I've been wearing it. However, just a month after that, around 3 a.m., I was sleeping and suddenly, my rosary fell and shattered into pieces on the floor. I jumped out of my bed immediately when it happened. I was so confused, but I didn't want to check on what could have caused it. So I decided to go back to sleep and just collect the scattered pieces of the rosary when I woke up. The next morning, I told my family about it again, and they got really scared because it was really unusual. But they couldn't do anything about it, so they just tried to cheer me up. Nothing has really happened since then, but I always wonder what would have happened if I opened my eyes to look right above my head to see who or what that deep voice was. This happened a couple of years ago. One night, my mom decided to hang out with her friends at a casino, and my dad was at work. So my 2 older sisters and I were home by ourselves. My sisters were 14 and 15 at the time, and I was 11. After my mom left, it was pretty exciting to be home by ourselves. But an hour later, it got boring, so we decided to play a game. We ended up playing hide and seek. At that point, I was a bit scared because it was 11 p.m., almost midnight. But then I kind of brushed it off since I thought my dad would come home soon. I didn't want to admit that I was scared. Also, I don't want to be home alone, so I decided to play. Let's just play hide and seek in the backyard, I suggested, but she refused. There are no hiding spots back there. Let's go to the forest, my sister said. After my sister said that, shivers went down my spine. But anyway, we stepped into the forest that's nearby. Go count, my second older sister said to me. I decided that I had to be brave. My other sister gave me a blindfold. What is this for? I asked. Put it on and try to find us, my sister said. While my sisters used flashlights to find a place to hide, I put the blindfold on and then counted to 30. When it was time, I said, "Ready or not, here I come." After walking around, touching every tree I walked by, 10 minutes had already passed, and I still hadn't found my sisters. Even while I was walking on this trail, I could barely see anything, so I tripped on a twig and fell. My clothes got dirty and my knees started bleeding. But I had no choice. I got up and walked around some more. I came across a tree and knew I finally found something. It felt like a person. "Haha, found you," I said. I then heard my sisters walking by behind me, saying, "Hey, how did you not find us yet?" At that moment, I froze. I took off my blindfold slowly and saw an old man sitting there smiling at me while holding a knife. "Can't I play with y'all?" he asked, with a cracking voice. He wore a dirty shirt, and his hair seemed like he didn't shower for a long time. My sisters and I screamed and started running out of the forest as quickly as we could. While running, I looked back and noticed the man chasing after us while holding the knife, swinging it in the air. He was laughing like a mad person. I've never felt that kind of fear before. But after running for a while, the old man couldn't keep up. He stopped running, stared at us, and then he turned around and went back into the forest. We got closer to our house, and then we saw our dad pulling into the driveway. We ran to him and told him what just happened. He was shocked, so he called the police immediately. The police went to the forest and they searched those areas for a few hours. After a while, they found and arrested the old man. The next day, we learned that the old man killed 4 female children and dumped their bodies in the woods. All the local news stations were covering the incident. When I heard that, I felt sick to my stomach. I am glad that we are safe, but now I pray for the 4 souls of the children. May they rest in peace.
I have a sister who got married when she was 18. She had a daughter named Susie. Her husband was unemployed. She had to work 2 jobs to support herself, her daughter, and her husband. Every day, she left the house at 8 a.m., and she only returned around 8 p.m. every night. Around this time, Susie had an imaginary friend. She told my sister it was a little girl named Jessica. Susie would talk about her all the time. My sister even overheard her talking to Jessica. It creeped her out, and after a while, she told Susie she was forbidden to talk about the girl. We weren't allowed to mention Jessica when we came over to visit. One day, Susie told her mom, "Jessica is mad at you because you don't believe she's real. She comes to play with me when Daddy closes the closet door after you leave, and he lets us out before you come home." My sister had no idea this was happening. Her husband was supposed to be watching Susie during the day. Instead, he would lock her in the closet with a box of cereal and leave her there all day. When my sister discovered what was going on, she kicked her husband out. The poor little girl spent so much time all alone, locked in a closet, that she had conjured up an imaginary playmate for herself. My sister divorced her husband and got custody of Susie. She decided to move out of the house they were renting. When the moving van came, the old man who owned the house came over to help them. He was talking to my sister and said, "I was always worried about your little girl on those basement stairs. My granddaughter fell down those basement stairs and broke her neck. She died in front of the closet down there." When she heard that, my sister got the chills. "What was her name?" she asked. "It wasn't Jessica, was it?" The old man looked at her and said her name was Jessica. She was only 4 years old. She couldn't say it properly, and how did you know that's how she said her name, Jessica? How did you know? My sister was in denial. She told him she didn't know what he was talking about. She refused to talk about it, grabbed the last of her things, and left the house for good. Even today, we're still not allowed to talk about Susie and her imaginary friend, Jessica. My sister remarried a few years later, and Susie got a great new stepdad. But Susie, when we speak alone, she always brings up that little girl and what she looked like. And it still creeps me out to this day, because I don't really believe in that type of stuff with ghosts and paranormal, but There's no way that Susie could have known about that little girl. But who knows? Maybe they are real, and maybe not.
Every night, I hear my mother through the walls, but she never talks during the day, only at night. Like clockwork, she begins at midnight and abruptly stops at 6 a.m. I've heard everything, from harsh whispers, playful talking, cackling, and even screaming. Some of the things I hear her say frighten me. It's about dark and dreadful things. Whenever I enter her room to check on her, the silence is there. She just rocks in her chair. This is enough. I can't take it anymore. My mom has been suffering from seizures for the past few years, and they're getting worse. The doctor told me that she needed full-time care, so I volunteered. Even though she has always been estranged and I hadn't seen her in a decade, I knew she needed me. So I kinda thought it might be my last chance to stay with her. But it's gotten too much. She scares me. She doesn't even eat. I've tried and tried, but she doesn't open her mouth. I've tried to get her out of her bedroom, or at least out of her chair, but she gets aggressive. So whenever she needs a bath, I bathe her right where she sits. She just rocks in her chair, mindlessly smiling at her closet. She does this all day. I have no idea what I have to do next. I'm about to go insane. I can handle caring for her during the day, but at night I can't anymore. So I finally went to the doctor for some help. I told him that she's been keeping me up at night with her whispering and talking. And I also told him that it's getting too much and she's starting to scare me. But his facial expression while looking towards me was weird. He stared at me like he didn't understand what I was talking about. And what the doctor said next scared me even more.
Well, I think you had a bad dream. Your mother bit her tongue off a few years ago. She can't talk at all.
It happened when I was around 11 years old. One day, I was at my friend Kenzie's house. My other friend Emma joined us too. It was a lazy weekend, so we decided to kill some time by baking cookies and doing other things. We all gathered in Kenzie's room and did our geometry homework, which was the main reason we were all there. But soon after, we got bored doing it since we were young teenage girls. So we jumped on the bed, watched YouTube and Netflix, and told each other scary stories. The one I'll never forget is Kenzie's story. She told me a story that kept me paranoid for the rest of my stay at the house. She told us the owner of the house was found murdered in this house, and she sometimes feels like someone lives in her closet. A few hours later, Kenzie's parents said that they were going to a party and wouldn't be back until 6 in the morning. Kenzie didn't want to spend the night with her grandma and little sister, so she suggested that we should have a sleepover. It sounded like a great idea, so we just called each of our parents, and it took a lot of convincing to have the sleepover. When we got permission, we all changed into Kenzie's pajamas, got in bed, and watched something scary. It was almost 8 p.m. Kenzie's room was so messy, it almost looked like a pig's pen, so we decided that we would record a time-lapse of us cleaning. We were in the middle of cleaning the room when the doorbell suddenly rang. It was our pizza delivery. We all forgot to turn the camera off and left to eat. We just sat in the living room, ate, and talked for a while. After we finished eating the pizza, we went back to her room. I realized that we left the camera on. But as I reached to grab my phone, I felt something. I was anxious, even though her room was very silent. So I told my friends to come closer. We all stood there and watched the video. As soon as we left, the window opened slowly. There was a man who came inside, and then he ran into the bathroom. We all froze, knowing that someone was in the bathroom, which was connected to this room, but tried not to make any noise. Then Kenzie told us that we should all leave this room, so we did just that. We went to her grandma's room with her little sister. We immediately locked the door, called the police, and Kenzie's parents. Thankfully, the police arrived in less than 5 minutes. When they arrived at the house, they went to Kenzie's room and found the man. Near the sink was a gun and a pocket knife, and they arrested him. It turns out that he was put in jail last week for raping young girls and then murdering them. But he escaped prison and tried to find another victim. I couldn't help but imagine what would have happened if I didn't look at the footage on my camera. To this day, I hate going to sleepovers. Now I'm 16, and I heard that the man escaped again after killing the security guards. I hope he's not looking for me or my friends. This story takes place in South Africa, my home country. It happened last year during July, right after I turned 18. I had a 3-week holiday before I had to go back to school, and my sister decided to take me and a few friends to KwaZulu-Natal for a trip to a mountain range. It was me, my sister called Kate, and my 3 friends, Ashley, May, and Hannah. The last place we visited before we went to the cold mountain range was called Izandlwana, where the Shaka Zulu army fought Britain with many fatalities. We got to the place at around midnight since there was no security, so we decided to explore the grounds and look at the thousands of graves placed around the land. It wasn't until after I asked to give it a rest and find a place to stay for the night that my sister pulled a box out of her bag. It was the infamous Ouija board. We used to believe in the paranormal side of the world, so all 5 of us decided to play. I mean, it was such a perfect place to do it. So we sat down by one of the bigger graves and started playing. But the board wasn't really doing anything until my sister lost her temper and took her fingers off. The keys started moving around in short circles before going over the letters and spelling out RUNTHEAREHERE. Run. They are here. At first, we were all kind of laughing. We weren't really scared because we'd had a crap ton of alcohol before playing the game and thought it was one of the girls doing it. However, all of a sudden, Ashley stood up, cried out in pain, and she claimed something was stabbing her. "Help! Help me!" she screamed, so we immediately stopped playing and went to help her. When she lifted up her shirt, we could see a long and deep scratch that went from where her heart is down to her stomach. We were all shocked, so we left the place in a hurry since the nearest clinic was over an hour away. When we arrived, our situation only got worse, considering we were a group of white girls who only knew how to speak English and a bit of Dutch, while everyone inside of the clinic was a Zulu native and didn't know any English. We couldn't get my friend any help, since neither we nor the nurses understood each other until we lifted up my friend's shirt to show them the wound. We felt so stuffy, and eventually one nurse sterilized her and bandaged her up. However, surprisingly, the next morning when we woke up inside of my sister's van, She was no longer wounded, and it was as if the event didn't even happen. Someone later told us that it might be a Zulu trademark to cut their enemies' hearts from their gut in respect of the body they had killed, preparing them for the afterlife. But who knows? Now, over a year later, none of us truly know what happened. I go to university, and they are still my only friends. The memory becomes more and more distant over time, and I sometimes believe that we all just hallucinated. But the one thing for sure is that I will never, ever touch the Ouija board again.
This happened pretty recent, about 3 weeks ago. Myself and 3 friends were hanging out at a shopping center one evening. We were messing around posting clips on TikTok. Then one of my friends started laughing, and I asked her what she was laughing at. She told me that guy behind us kept staring at me. When I turned around, it was some older guy just watching me. He had black sunglasses, a cap, an old Adidas tracksuit with scuffed up shoes, and had a disgusting looking beard. My friends thought it was hilarious, but I found it really weird. Then another one of my friends said she thinks that guy lives on her street, about a few houses down from her. She said that he actually follows her on TikTok. At that point, I quickly got my phone out to check if he was following me, and he was. I had to block him because he seemed a bit creepy. We went to get McDonald's before we went home, and I received a message on TikTok from someone. It was that guy who had been following us. His name was Greg, and he wrote, "Why did you block me?" with 2 emojis. One was a crying face, and the other one was an angry face. He had actually created another account that day in the shopping center. I blocked that account as well, hoping that would be the end of it. I didn't mention it to my friends this time, knowing they would just laugh. That night, I was up late and had Netflix on in the background as I was chatting with my friends on Facebook while scrolling through TikTok. I got up to use the bathroom, and when I returned, I had 3 messages from my friends, all saying the same thing. All were things like, "Who's in your room?" and "What's up with your last post?" I asked them what they were talking about, and they told me to check my TikTok, so I did. It was a clip of my bedroom. It was a clip of someone picking up my phone and recording the inside of my room. At that point, I heard a creaking. Then I heard a man's voice say, "Sorry, please don't scream," and turned to see my closet door slightly open. I started to scream when the same guy who had been following us burst out of my closet and tried to cover my mouth. Thank God I screamed and it was enough for my parents to hear. They came upstairs and my dad tackled the guy to the floor. The police were called and he was arrested. We were informed that the guy had straight up admitted to stalking and breaking and entering. One of my friends pointed out, if I go back and look at the post on TikTok from when we were in the shopping center, you can see Greg is in almost all of those pictures, somewhere in the background. I haven't heard what's going to happen to Greg yet, but I just hope he won't ever come near us again.
This is not about my story, but someone from my church, and he wanted to share his experience with anyone else. He's a 32-year-old man, and his pseudonym is Mark. He's a fairly big guy, and this situation took place when he was on his way home from work. He said that he had lost his phone 1 week before this whole situation happened, so he couldn't call and get any help during the story. It was quite late, around 11 p.m. He had finished work and was walking to a taxi stop location, and when he got there, a few people were standing around waiting as well. After about 2 minutes, he noticed that there was a minivan approaching. Usually, minivans are cheaper than taxis, and he felt tired that day, so he decided to take the minivan. He sat on a seat, and there was a young boy seated in the passenger side next to the driver who was collecting the fare. And then, 2 other boys who looked like teenagers also boarded the minivan and sat in the seats in front of him. Once the minivan took off, after about 5 minutes, the boy asked if they would like to drink some Coke. The boys accepted and started drinking. And they also gave it to Mark. Mark was also feeling thirsty, so he took it, but only a sip. Not much later, he started feeling drowsy. Just before he about laid his head on the seat beside him, he noticed that those 2 boys were already knocked out. After he laid his head down, he heard noises coming from the back seats. 2 people were talking in a different language. The car was passing a big signboard that showed Crest Chicken Farm. And then he finally passed out. When he got up, he found himself inside a big shed-like barn, and there were some tools on a big table. He was on the floor, and the other 2 teenage boys were laying next to him. He still felt a bit drowsy, but he managed to get himself up as he was looking for an escape. He saw that the 2 boys were still passed out, so he tried waking them, but they wouldn't budge. As Mark was kind of a big man, he tried to see if he could carry one of them, but it was hard to do because even Mark was having a hard time to stand properly. And then he heard voices. He took a peek from the door, and 3 people were walking toward the big shed, coming from a house on the hill, which was quite close to the shed. Mark panicked and tried to look for another exit. He was looking around the place, and he found one at the end of the shed, luckily. He approached quietly and escaped as fast as he could. At this point, his vision was all blurry, but he managed to find a fence door and unlocked it. He heard the people shouting, but he ignored. He just kept on running. When he finally reached his house, it was early morning, around 5 a.m. His wife was up all night waiting for him and ran out the front door as soon as she saw him. He collapsed and slept for almost the whole day. When he woke up and finally got a chance to explain to his wife what had transpired that night, he remembered about the other 2 boys who were still there. Then he contacted the police immediately. He told the police about the road signs and a big billboard for Crest Chicken Farm and other things that he could remember. About 2 weeks after, there was a police report about how they found 2 teenage boys' bodies in a lake and advised that when they examined the bodies, all their organs were missing. Mark just stood in fear. And as the event was too traumatic for him, Mark had to quit a job for a while. When I was in my last year of college, I started going to frat parties more often. I remember where they would have the frat parties at. It was at some creepy abandoned lake. There was one cabin around the lake, and it was big enough for parties. And that night, me and my friend Kai were walking to the lake for the party. When we got there, I saw a beautiful young girl. She had blonde hair with pretty blue eyes. Kai noticed that I was staring at her, and of course, he made a dumb joke. I told him to shut up, and he chuckled. And then he said, "Go talk to her, dude." I refused at first, but after 5 minutes, Kai convinced me to go over to her. So I finally went for it. I walked up to her and I said, "Hey, are you new around here?" She then said, "Yeah, it's my first year of college," and smiled. Then she told me that her name was Jamie. We started talking, and about 1 hour later, we decided to go into the woods. As soon as we were far enough away from the party, she looked at me and we started kissing. Well, to tell the truth, it was the best moment ever of my life. After about 20 minutes of making out, she said, "Let's go back to the party." But after walking for 5 miles, I heard something. And suddenly, I realized that Jamie was with me no more. She was gone while I was not paying attention to her. I called her name, but there was no answer. Then I heard a strange sound again on my left side. I went to investigate, and I froze in fear. It was a man in his late 50s, tied up to a tree. He had tape on his mouth and he was beaten up badly. So I untied him, took the tape off, and I asked him, "Are you okay, sir?" The man said he was okay, and I asked again, "Who did this to him?" And his answer terrified me. He replied that it was the girl with blonde hair, with blue eyes. As soon as he said it, I heard rustling noises coming from behind me. I turned around. Jamie was there, and she had an axe in her hand. She was smiling again, but now it became madness. I tried talking to Jamie and told her to put the axe down, but she didn't listen. She threw the axe right at me. Luckily, the axe missed me and hit a log beside me. I had no choice at all. I tackled her to the ground and screamed for help. Kai and two other dudes came to me in a hurry and helped to restrain her. I was pissed and also shocked. I asked her, why did she attack that man? She laughed and told me, "What's the problem? You don't have to worry about it," or something like that. I told Kai to watch her while I called the cops, and the cops showed up within minutes. The party was canceled, and everyone had to go back to campus. I still think what would have happened if I didn't pay attention to the sounds and just kept walking to the party. I hope Jamie never finds me again.
A few years ago, more like 10 years ago, I used to be big into visiting weird websites. I had a lot of time on my hand due to not playing sports, nor did I volunteer for anything at all in high school. I told my friend Mark that I was starting to get bored. Honestly, I was bored with what I was experiencing on these websites. He said I should go on the deep web. He and I used to go on the deep web, but never found anything. So I decided to search through some more stuff, a little deeper. I searched for hours every day for about 2.5 months. Still nothing that I hadn't seen already. I told Mark, and of course he said just visit the dark web. When I did go on the dark web, I saw chat rooms, all with different names. I came across one named I, as in EYE. It was all in caps. I entered the chat, but before entering the live chat, you are assigned a number. Mine was P34. I confirmed my number and entered. There were hundreds of people. The comments were coming in quick. At first, I didn't understand what was going on. The screen was black, then a name popped up on the screen that said Mr. Wiggles. The comments immediately stopped and a voice came over my speakers. "Welcome, P34. Then his name disappeared off of the screen and the comments continued, everyone giving me welcomes. A few minutes go by, then a countdown from 10 pops up on the screen. Then the chat goes crazy. Once it reached the number 1, the screen went straight to what looks like a view from a camera just watching someone in what looks like at their home. I sat there watching this for 20 minutes and nothing happened, so I shut down my computer. The next day I went to school, had a normal day, went to Walmart, then I went home. I decided to go back on the same chat from before. I confirmed my number P34 and again, there were hundreds of people commenting. Mr. Wiggles popped up and just like before, the comments stopped. Across the screen it said, "No new members tonight." Then the countdown started again. Everyone in the chat started going wild. The countdown finished and then it was showing the point of view from a camera again. But it was outside of a school. My school from earlier that day. At that point I was intrigued. I couldn't tell if it was focused on a certain person or just watching the school. After 30 minutes of watching the video, our school bell rang and everyone started to come outside while whoever was recording was positioned across the street in the car. Once everyone came out, the person got out of the car and started to follow a crowd of kids. Everyone started to split from each other and the person recording started to follow someone. It was my friend Mark. He had to be at least 100 feet behind him. I started to call Mark, but he didn't answer. I kept calling him as I watched the video, but nothing. The person followed him to his house and sat outside of his house for a few minutes. The man behind the camera finally said, "No parents are home." And he began to walk to Mark's house, rang the doorbell, and waited as he continued to record. A few seconds go by, and Mark opened the door. He looked confused, and the guy said, "P34 sent me." And Mark looked afraid that the camera shut off and everyone in the chat left. So I did too. I called Mark's house phone instead of his cell phone, and his mother answered. I asked for Mark, and she said that she thought he was with me. I panicked. I then received a notification on my phone from my Gmail account. It said the sender was Mr. Wiggles. The message was, "I'm getting closer, P34. Mark says hi." I was shocked and didn't know what to do, so I called the cops. They didn't do anything about it because the email disappeared. I haven't been on the dark web since, and no one has seen Mark. Still to this day, I receive messages with pictures of me in random places, along with the same written message that said, "It can happen anytime." I honestly wish I never went on the dark web.
I don't know what to do. It all started 3 weeks ago. My mom disappeared. She was at home in the morning, nothing different. She hugged me, saying goodbye, wished me luck with school, and gave me a packed lunch. And when I got home that evening, she wasn't there. She didn't come back. So we called the police and all of the search was set up. The whole town came together and held a giant search party, lasting through the night, but there was no sign of her at all. She had just completely vanished. The weeks since were hell for both me and my dad. Rumors started spreading through town, and particularly around the school, that my mom had been murdered. Dad took things a lot worse than I did. He was a carpenter, so it wasn't unusual behavior for him to disappear into the garage for a long time to work on a chair or table or something. Especially, it was what he always did when he was stressed. I figured that's just how he was dealing with the grief. We barely spoke over the next couple weeks. He was locked in there from sunrise to midnight. And we might bump into each other at one point, but he'd just say goodnight and went to bed. Sure, it was a bit weird, but I understood that he was going through a lot. But the longer he spent in there, the less I was sure he was doing woodwork. There were large bottles of bleach popping up in our bins, and Dad barely took any break. One night, I had waited for him to go to sleep, and I crept down to try to open the door, but it was locked tight, and Dad always had the key. But today, when I came home from school, he was in the kitchen, freshly shaved, showered, had a rested face. He was totally different from what he'd been for the last couple of weeks. He was cooking. My dad used to love grilling, and his steaks were always amazingly delicious. So it was a nice change, since I fed myself only pot noodles and soup for a few weeks. He set down two of the biggest, bloodiest steaks I had ever seen in my life. But it looked kind of different. Not bad, but just different. Dad tucked into a steak straight away, and I did too. It was a bit tough to chew, but the seasoning and flavors tasted just as good as the rest of the steaks were. We had finished pretty soon, and I was feeling full and satisfied. Then Dad said something I can't stop thinking about. I doubt they'll ever find her body. His voice didn't sound sad or depressed. I didn't say anything, just stared at him. Hearing what he said sent shivers down my spine. Then I thought of the steaks. The late nights in the garage, hundreds of bleach bottles, and my dad's weird behavior. Did he feed me her body? Or am I just overthinking it? What do I do?
Ah!
What a pleasant way to begin my 3 AM shift at Mercy Hospital. The first thing I did as I sat down was cut my finger. It was a paper cut. And despite working at one of the largest hospitals in the state, I couldn't find a single band-aid laying around. I sucked on my index finger like a vampire while I scrambled my desk for that band-aid. I found one. Purple. I'm a hospital receptionist, and all that means is I greet visitors, make appointments, and look nice. Well, as nice as a 30-year-old man who hasn't slept in hours can look. That night, as we call it, it was just me and a few nurses on the floor. Other than that, it was ghost quiet, except for the heavy rain. I sat back on the cheap recliner chair all receptionists get the honour of using. While adjusting my band-aid, I listened to the television mounted on the corner of the ceiling as it broadcasted a seemingly important message.
Authorities say the woman was last seen on Cedar Avenue.
I looked up to see if the television was showing any images of this strange woman. None. It was yet another crazy person with no name and no face who we were supposed to look out for. Not creepy at all.
Authorities also say the woman was reportedly walking around and asking people very, very bizarre questions.
I focused back on my desk and continued working, but I still listened as the news anchor went on and on. She continued.
The following statement was issued by an unidentified government official.
Listen carefully, folks. Whatever she asks you, answer no. Do not, under any circumstances, answer yes.
Officials won't comment further as to why, citing security clearance. Please are asking that you immediately call 911 if you deem anyone suspicious.
I thought that part of the coverage was quite odd, but I wasn't sure anything could scare me anymore. Working here at the hospital, I thought I'd seen it all. At the flash of the ruby red ambulance lights, I've seen people come in with severed arms, legs, fingers, people who somehow managed to scoop out their eyes, failed suicide attempts, and much, much more. You get used to it. My head was practically sunk into my desk as I filled out paperwork. That's when I heard something very subtle, initially. I heard it coming from the front doors, the entrance. The automatic doors opened and closed, slamming against each other, and sounding an obnoxiously loud thud each time. The very dim lighting I had surrounding my desk flickered incessantly. Hello? I called out, seated behind the safety of my desk. Only the whistling wind responded. Hello? I called out again. I felt obligated to check if someone was there, especially since it might have been someone who was injured and needed our attention. I reluctantly picked myself up from my chair and walked over to inspect. I nearly slipped and cracked my head open as the entrance floor was almost flooded from the rain. I noticed footsteps, wet shoe marks that seemed to come inside the hospital and then back out. I stood near the doors, poking my head outside, and looked. All I heard was the distant sounds of sirens and honking cars. The rain poured harder. The peace and quiet was disturbed within moments of me sitting back down. The automatic door started again, opening and closing, slamming shut, and letting in more rain as they did. But this time, I heard gentle footsteps make their way towards me, tapping closer and closer. Someone slowly emerged from the darkness between the entrance and front desk. A woman with drenched black hair approached, wearing a dark brown raincoat and a pair of boots that were too large for her toothpick legs. Her face was inundated with wrinkles and wet makeup. Her black eyeshadow smudged. Despite the heavy rain outside, she didn't seem to have bothered wearing her hoodie. Hello, how can I help you, ma'am? She didn't respond. She looked around, scanning and observing an unimpressive hospital. Is there something I can help you with? Still nothing. We engaged in a brief stare down, which she won. I looked down and pretended to gather important paperwork. Are you here to visit someone? Then finally, she responded, without talking. She simply nodded and then took a few steps forward, her hands hanging down her side. Her posture was unnatural, almost uncomfortable. Okay, for now I need you to sign here, then we'll have to wait a few hours for visiting time to begin, I said, pushing forward a sheet of paper and a pen. She raised her arm to sign and then abruptly stopped. She seemed startled by something on the desk. She looked at me, tilted her head and, with a smile that was as wide as her eyes, said, "Would you please move that for me?" I was confused at first, and then she pointed at it with her index finger, as drops of rainwater tapped against my desk while her arm hovered over it. I took the little crucifix we had at the front desk and put it in a drawer. The woman proceeded as if she was going to finally sign the paper and then stop before writing anything. She dropped the pen on the ground and stood there again, staring at me. She asked me a question.
Do you reject the Trinity?
I'm sorry, I replied. For a few more uncomfortable moments, the woman stood there, like an ancient statue. I had no idea what she meant by the question. Ma'am, who exactly are you here to see? Family? Friend? What's your relationship with the patient? Before I could finish talking midway through my question, the woman turned around and walked out the door, still smiling and her eyes as wide as I'd ever seen on a person. I went back to work and tried to move on, but her creepy mannerisms were trapped in my mind throughout the night. At around 4 AM I spotted one of the children in our hospital walking down the hall. "Nina, is that you?" I called out. All the kids in the hospital knew me. I was proudly considered one of the cooler employees. I let them break the rules. I brought them snacks upstairs and even told them scary stories, despite their predictable regret later on. The nurses would get angry with me every time I held one of my scary story nights. They always had a bunch of bed sheets to change the next morning. I only did these things for the kids when I wasn't busy, when it was a quiet night, and this was one of those uneventful nights, which of course was a good thing. Anyway, it was very odd to see Nina awake at that time, walking down those shadowy halls. She was absolutely terrified of the dark, and yet there she was. "Nina, is that you?" I squinted my eyes as I walked towards her.
Sorry, Matt.
She began.
I don't want to be there anymore.
She had dragged her blue blanket along with her, which was her way of gesturing to us that she wanted to move to another room. "The other kids bothering you again?" I asked. I took hold of her hand and began walking her back to the elevator.
Matt, please, don't make me go back up there. I don't like the new nurse.
I stopped walking. "What?" I said, kneeling to Nina's level.
She keeps asking us the same question over and over. I said no so many times. I keep telling her no, but everyone else kept laughing with her and saying yes to her. Please, I don't want to go back up.
Nina's words immediately played flashbacks inside my tired, overworked mind. Something about a strange woman going around and asking even stranger questions. I didn't pay enough attention to that broadcast to notice the woman, but even if I had, I thought she had left the hospital. I ditched the elevator and ran up a flight of daunting stairs, stomping against each step with all the force I could muster. I probably woke up all those sleeping employees. I was so loud. I opened the door to the children's room and couldn't believe my eyes. I checked each room, each one on each floor. I woke up my co-worker nurse and asked about the children. She couldn't find them either. We looked everywhere and put the hospital on lockdown. We set off all possible alarms and other emergency procedures. We didn't find them. All that was left behind were their clothes.
My name is Pascal. I'm 22 years old now, but this event happened 3 years ago when I was 19. It happened in the middle of the night when my parents were away for an important company meeting. The company was kind of far away from where we lived, so I stayed home by myself while they were gone. One time, while I was at home alone, I looked out the window randomly and froze. There was a tall man, almost dressed entirely in black. He was wearing a tuxedo and holding a kitchen knife. This guy was standing right outside of the door, looking at me. He wasn't laughing at all, and his head was twitching continuously. "Sir, please get off our property, otherwise I'll call the police." I opened the window and told him. Then the man replied, "Oh, you can do that if you want, as long as you don't look away." Because of this strange attitude, I felt anxious, so I grabbed my cell phone and called the police. But when I looked out the window again, he was gone. At that very moment, I heard footsteps coming from downstairs. I suddenly remembered that I forgot to lock my garden door, so it was still open. I thought I was gonna die at first, but then I pulled myself together. I got my bat and looked down the stairs, slowly, trying not to make a sound. There he was. He was just staring at me. He didn't move but said, "I told you not to look away." A few moments later, we heard sirens. The man still did not move. But then he suddenly changed his mind and walked over to me. I tried to swing my bat towards him, but I was so scared. I couldn't do anything except scream. The police broke down the door. One policeman tried to arrest him, and the other one tried to take the knife away from him, but the man resisted. He was strong. Even though he was outnumbered, they couldn't stop him. They threatened to shoot him in the foot, but he didn't care. Furthermore, he attacked the two policemen, and they tumbled down to the ground. I ran to one of the rooms and slammed the door shut, but he kicked in the door. When the door opened, I could see his face, and I will never, ever forget that moment. However, at that very moment, the police caught up to him and shot his foot. The guy started screaming in pain. Shortly after that, he managed to jump outside of a window and disappeared. The policemen chased after him, but unfortunately, they failed to arrest him. I never saw that guy again. I'm glad that I survived that incident, but I also feel nervous that he'll come to my house again. From that day on, I always made sure I locked all the doors and windows.
A few years ago, me and my family went on our yearly holiday to Madeira, which is the birthplace of my parents. It was pretty normal for us to go annually, as our grandparents were living there. We would sleep in one of our grandparents' home, and during the day, we would go to festivals. If you do not know much about Madeira, then this story will probably give you a better idea. It's not that a physical thing occurred that holiday. It was just this nightmare that became very real for me as a child. As I said before, I was staying at my grandparents' house while in Madeira. I had a room to myself on the upper floor. It was pretty creepy since my grandmother loved Victorian-style dolls. Once I was able to fall asleep, I had a creepy dream that I can't forget. I woke up, and from my bed, I could hear movement on the floor. I looked down to see that the floor was covered in black insects, just crawling around. I could not see the almond brown wood floorboards, and began to yell for help. Someone opened my door, and I saw my little brother come in, but behind him was a woman in a hideous purple dress. I never saw this woman before, but before my brother even came closer to me, I saw the woman force her hand into his back and tear out his heart. I remember screaming in the dream, and all the woman said was, "Your parents aren't here." And I woke up. I was so scared that I went into the next room where my brother should have been asleep, but because it was dark, I couldn't see him. Well, I was a dumb kid. My anxiety level rose even higher. I ran out, went downstairs, and none of my parents were around. I started to panic more because of what that lady in my dreams said, and I started to cry even more. Then I heard my older brother call my name from up the stairs. The stairs I just ran down. I told him I had a bad dream, and he stayed in my room after showing me that my little brother was snoring away in his bed. The next morning, my brother told my parents how I behaved, so my mother asked me what happened. I told her about the dream with the lady in the hideous purple dress. My mother's face became serious, and she looked worried. I didn't know why, since that was unusual for her. About 2 years later, I was going through my parents' wedding album in our home in Madeira, while I was sorting out the top floor of the house with my younger brother. I noticed that one of the pictures was ripped in half. I thought it was unusual, so I began looking through to see where the other half was. It wasn't in the album. I brushed it off. About an hour later, I was going through one of the drawers in the living room cabinet. I saw this picture of a woman in a purple dress. She looked almost identical to the woman in my dream. It was the same dress. I began to get goosebumps, so I put the album on top of a table and opened it to the page with the teared up picture. I began to shiver once the tear of both pictures fit perfectly well together. With worry, I began to ask my mother who was in the image. All I know to this day is that she is perceived as a witch and fled with my maternal uncle from Madeira. Soon after, the whole community began to believe it. This is possibly all just a coincidence, but it does send a shiver down my spine. I've never met this woman, but she appeared in my dreams. I have no idea on whether or not I will forget the specific details of that dream, especially since I found out more about this woman, who is my aunt-in-law.
This happened around the year 2011, when I was 13. One day my friend was planning on throwing a party at his place, so my older cousin drove me there. It took about 4 hours to get there, and when I finally arrived, it was around 8 p.m. A few hours later, we were having fun, but out of nowhere, I had to use the bathroom really badly. About 5 minutes had passed, and while I was in the bathroom, I heard a crunching noise coming from the woods. At first, I thought it was someone who arrived late to the party, but all of a sudden, I heard loud banging on the glass. I started to think it might be my friend just looking for me, so I told him that I was inside the bathroom. However, it wasn't my friend. It was a guy who looked like he was in his late 50s. He said that his car broke down. He then asked me to help him, but I was already paranoid about strangers, so I simply told him that I couldn't help him. He nodded his head and walked away. When I was done using the bathroom, I went back to the room where my friend was. I told him what I saw and what the man said to me. My friend looked like he just saw a ghost. Then he finally said that for almost 2 months, this man was stalking his entire family and also saw him from the bathroom window tons of times. They asked the police to check their area several times, but they couldn't help his family. When he said that, I thought he was overreacting, until I heard the same banging noise now coming from the door. It was more violent now. Everybody paused what they were doing and looked at the door in shock. One guest broke the silence and said it was probably only the pizza delivery man. But my friend told me not to answer the door at all costs. I looked through the peephole, and there he was, the same guy I saw through the bathroom's window. He had a psychotic-looking face and was licking his lips nonstop. We all just stood there in silence and hoped that the man would go away. But after a few minutes, the loud noise came from the basement. The guy threw a brick at the basement's window and crawled through it. Suddenly, it sounded as if a gunshot echoed through the entire house. My friend and most of the partygoers screamed and ran out of the house. I stayed behind along with a few others. One of the older kids was trained in martial arts, so I saw him assault and attack the man until he was shot. Afterward, the man escaped and ran into the woods. The whole scene was chaotic now. An ambulance and police car arrived soon after, and fortunately, the kid that was shot survived. After a few days of intense investigation, the police went to my friend's house and told him that they caught the guy. It turns out that he was living in the woods. He also kidnapped 3 kids, but luckily they were found in time and set free. But they also found out that he had already killed a few kids already. So after that, he was condemned to death for murder.
Every night, I hear my mother through the walls, but she never talks during the day, only at night. Like clockwork, she begins at midnight and abruptly stops at 6 a.m. I've heard everything, from harsh whispers, playful talking, cackling, and even screaming. Some of the things I hear her say frighten me. It's about dark and dreadful things. Whenever I enter her room to check on her, the silence is there. She just rocks in her chair. This is enough. I can't take it anymore. My mom has been suffering from seizures for the past few years, and they're getting worse. The doctor told me that she needed full-time care, so I volunteered. Even though she has always been estranged and I hadn't seen her in a decade, I knew she needed me. So I kinda thought it might be my last chance to stay with her. But it's gotten too much. She scares me. She doesn't even eat. I've tried and tried, but she doesn't open her mouth. I've tried to get her out of her bedroom, or at least out of her chair, but she gets aggressive. So whenever she needs a bath, I bathe her right where she sits. She just rocks in her chair, mindlessly smiling at her closet. She does this all day. I have no idea what I have to do next. I'm about to go insane. I can handle caring for her during the day, but at night I can't anymore. So I finally went to the doctor for some help. I told him that she's been keeping me up at night with her whispering and talking. And I also told him that it's getting too much and she's starting to scare me. But his facial expression while looking towards me was weird. He stared at me like he didn't understand what I was talking about. And what the doctor said next scared me even more.
Well, I think you had a bad dream. Your mother bit her tongue off a few years ago. She can't talk at all.
It all started one summer afternoon in August. My best friend Mike invited me to his house. Mike was the type of kid you'd call a nerd. He always got good grades, wore glasses, had freckles, and believed in things like dragons and magic. One of Mike's favorite things to do was performing magic for me. Every time I'd come over, he'd perform magic. But this magic trick, though, would be the one that I'd never forget. When I got to Mike's house, he said, "I have a new magic trick to show you, and it's the best one." He grabbed my hand and we went into the living room where he had a large box in front of his family photo. It was all 4 of his family members in that picture: Mike, Josh, and his mom and dad. The box was about his size so we could fit in it, and his older brother Josh was standing next to it. So I sat down on a couch and Mike started introducing the name of his magic trick. It was called the Vanishing. Josh opened the door to the large box where nothing was inside, and Mike walked in. After Josh closed the door again, he then said some weird words and then yelled, "Poof!" Josh slowly opened the box, and Mike was no longer in it. However, I was in the 7th grade, so I was smart enough to know that under the box was a trap door so he could climb down out of it. So I looked down at the bottom of the box, but to my surprise, nothing was there. No door, no secret, no Mike. Just at that moment, my mom called and said that I need to come home right now. I said bye to Josh, grabbed my backpack, and yelled, "Nice trick, Mike. Gotta go." Everything was fine, just until the next day. The next day, Mike didn't invite me, but I thought of going to his house again. I ran up to his house, stood in front of the door, and rang the doorbell 3 times. His dad came out and said, "Oh, hello. Nice to meet you." He acted like that he'd never seen me before. It was weird, but I asked, "Good afternoon, sir. Is Mike home?" Then I could see his confused face, and he answered, "Mike? Who is Mike?" I felt stupid at that moment, as if I had come to the wrong house. I then quickly asked, "Your son Mike. You have 2 sons." During explaining the situation, I felt irritated, so I pushed him to the side to get into the living room. "Josh," I said, pointing to the photo, and then my eyes widened. Mike wasn't in the photo. I was pointing to nothing, which would have been where Mike should be standing in that picture. I panicked, and I couldn't believe what was going on here. I then said, "You're your son, Mike. He has good grades, and he's good at magic." Oh, the box. I thought that everyone was playing a prank with me or something, but he looked extremely confused and even terrified. He looked at me as if I was some kind of lunatic. So I ran upstairs to check the box, and I opened the door thinking that I must be dreaming. The room was full of bookshelves and beanbags, all in a circle. It was just a cozy reading room. I was horrified. I kept saying, "No, it can't be," over and over. At that moment, Josh came in the room. I thought, this is the last chance. I quickly took out my phone thinking that I could remind Mike to them by showing selfies that I took with Mike before. However, just when I did, he was in none of the pictures. The one where I gave him a hug, where we went to the other friend's birthday party and took a picture with the clown, nothing was there. It was like he never even existed before, and I felt that moment was like a nightmare. To this day, there is literally no one who remembers Mike in my town. I still can't believe what happened to Mike, but I definitely believe that Mike is real. And he must be somewhere.
My name is Caitlin. This incident happened when I was 14 years old, and I will never forget this memory. One day, I was at home alone at my house. My mom was still at the office late at night, and my two siblings were at my grandparents' house, which was kind of far away from my home. At first, I was just enjoying my time alone, watching Netflix and doing some fun stuff. However, after a while, I got pretty bored, so I decided to invite some of my friends over. I asked my mom for permission and then called my friends to invite them over. A few moments later, while I was waiting for them, I heard a loud bang upstairs. I was sure that there was no one else upstairs. So I stood up and looked up the stairs with an anxious look on my face. When I was near the stairs, I could see that one of my dolls had fallen. I picked it up, and when I straightened my back, something caught my attention. A little girl was standing upstairs. Well, I could feel that she was staring at me, even though I couldn't see her face clearly due to the darkness. I was terrified, and then someone rang the doorbell. I ran to see who it was, and luckily, my friends had arrived. Thank God, it was a moment of relief that my friends came over at the right time. Soon, I got my mind off of the girl I saw. We sat down in the living room and had fun talking with each other. An hour later, one of my friends suggested that we should take some pictures together, so we gathered around one another. We took several selfies while laughing and chatting. Later, as we scrolled through the pictures, we found something. There was a little girl standing behind our couch. What made us even more terrified was the fact that she had no face. I mean, her face was just an empty darkness. No eyes, no nose, and no mouth. Being terrified, I told Cassie to delete that picture right away. However, she said that something was wrong with her cell phone. I snatched the phone out of her hands and tried to delete it. But no matter what we tried, we couldn't delete the picture. Then we heard loud thumps. It sounded like someone's footsteps were coming from upstairs, and our light was flickering on and off at the same time. We thought that we couldn't stay inside anymore, so we rushed outside in a hurry. One of my friends, Christina, suddenly pointed at my bedroom window and said that there was someone in there. I raised my eyes up and followed her finger, and there she was. It was the same faceless girl we had seen in the picture. My friends and I screamed. I called my mom and explained everything. My mom couldn't believe what I told her, so she made me calm down and said that she would be home in 5 minutes. After she arrived home, she searched the entire house, but she couldn't find any trace of the girl. I hoped that it was just our imaginations. However, we soon decided to move out of the house because I kept seeing the girl after that incident. We finally moved, and from then on, my mom never wanted me to be home alone, so I always stayed with my siblings. I still have no clue why the girl haunted me, but I think it was because she wanted us to get out of the house. Well, I'm just glad that I don't see that girl in my new house. When I was in high school, I was crazy about a boy band and used to stay up late at night watching their videos. Because of this, I used to fall asleep at around 3 or 4 a.m. The town I lived in was sort of a new city under construction, so it was really quiet and there was no one outside during that time. One night, it was around 3 a.m., I suddenly heard a woman singing outside. It was an old song, and the strange thing was that the woman was singing just one part of the song over and over again. She didn't move on to the next section. She would just start singing, pause for a minute, and then continued singing again. Out of curiosity, I opened the window and was about to sing the next verse of the song to surprise her. However, before that, I sent a text message to my friend. "Hey, someone is singing outside and keeps repeating the same part. LOL, should I sing along with her?" Not long after, my friend responded, and then I had to shut the window quietly because I was terrified. The text said, "Don't do that. That's a ghost." When ghosts find someone to harm, they first sing and then wait for the person to sing along.
There's a building that has a parking garage with a bicycle parking area on the lowest level that me and a group of my friends like to hang out at and skateboard. I called up my friends Jordan, Dorian, Jalen, and Aditya one Sunday to ask if they wanted to go skateboarding with me at the garage. They all agreed, so we met up at my house and rode our skateboards and longboards through the unkept paths between the apartment buildings and arrived at the garage. We waited for a car to drive in and set off the sensor to open the garage door. Then we tailgated in. When we got inside, we rode our boards around, just practicing some skills. Eventually, we rode down to the lower level and sat in the bicycle parking area to have a break and drink some soda. All of a sudden, a car pulled up and parked in a spot that was visible from the bicycle parking area. The car sat in the spot with its engine running and the driver still sitting inside. Then another van pulled up and shut off its engine in the middle of the road. Both drivers got out and met each other halfway. They were both tall and intimidating with their hoods up. One driver passed the other driver money, but then they suddenly began to argue. We all watched in awe as they flung their hands around dramatically and started to shout. We couldn't make out what they were saying since the loud echo distorted their voices. We all froze as the van driver pulled out a gun and shot the other driver in the throat. The driver collapsed, blood pooling around him. The van's driver yelled something, and then we saw two other guys get out of the van, one tossing the body into the back seat, and the other began wiping up the blood. Something was going on here, and I could tell we were in danger. Dorian whispered that we had to leave, now. We all began to quietly grab our skateboards and started hiding behind a wall. But the blood-cleaning guy spotted Jalen as he was making his way over and yelled to the driver. The van started up, and right then, Aditya screamed. We all threw down our skateboards and began pushing away as fast as possible. I could hear so many noises in my ears, like skateboards moving, voices shouting and screaming, and the roaring van behind us. Dorian was on an electric skateboard and was taking the lead as we wound around the ramps, rising to the next level. Jordan was next to me, and Aditya was close behind us on his scooter. Jalen, who had been the last to leave, was falling behind, and we could see the van speeding up behind him. I yelled for him to run to the side, and he popped his skateboard into his hands and took a sharp turn to the left, running up a fire escape. The van screeched around the corner as Dorian began approaching the garage door. And that's when I realized something. We had to wait for a car to trigger the sensor and open the door. I yelled at Dorian to take the staircase to the right, and he did. Jordan and I hopped off our skateboards and ushered Aditya into the staircase. We burst out into some dirty apartment floor, and I quickly called Jalen. He picked up and told us he was outside the apartment building by the main road. We held our skateboards and ran through the apartment floor until we found the fire escape. Then we managed to run outside and met Jalen, where we called the cops. After the cops arrived, they started to search the parking garage. They couldn't find any traces nor the cars there, so they decided to check the security footage. The footage revealed the van's license plate was covered with duct tape, but they did catch the license plate of the car of the driver who'd been shot. They said they'd keep us updated and gave us a lift home. Since then, We've never seen the van again or gotten any important information from the cops. My friends and I have recently resorted to the much safer and public skate park nearby and never visited that garage again.
One evening, I was looking for an internet cafe because I needed to send a few emails. I spotted one in an old building. The sign said it was on the 6th floor. When I walked through the entrance, there was a dark hallway that led to a small elevator. I pressed the call button, and when the doors opened, I stepped inside. In a lot of Asian countries, many buildings do not have a 4th floor. The number 4 is considered bad luck because the word 4 sounds almost the same as the word for death. When it stopped and the doors opened, I was about to step out when I realized that something was wrong. The hallway was in total darkness. By the light emanting from the elevator, I could make out a random piece of furniture covered with white cloth. It looked like it hadn't been touched in years. I thought I might have gotten off on the wrong floor, so I checked the buttons, but none of them were lit up. There was nothing to indicate which floor I was on. Just then, I noticed something moving at the end of the darkened hallway. I couldn't quite make out what it was, but it looked like a person dressed in some type of gown. The figure was moving slowly down the hallway towards the elevator. It creeped me out, and in a panic, I started pressing the closed door button. All of a sudden, the light in the elevator flickered and turned dark. I was plunged into the pitch darkness. I was so freaked out I almost wet myself. Just as I was about to lose it completely, the lights flickered back on. The doors closed. The elevator jolted back to life and began to ascend again. I breathed a sigh of relief. When the doors opened this time, I was at the internet cafe. I went over to the counter and told the girl who worked there and what had happened. As she listened, her face grew pale. She said that some of the customers and a few of her co-workers had experienced the same thing. She had never experienced anything herself, but she told me about the history of the building. Apparently, the 4th floor had been a hair salon at one time. It was prospering and doing pretty good until one of the women who worked there killed herself in the salon. Nobody knew the reason why. The salon continued to operate, but they were plagued by weird and inexplainable events. Sometimes when customers were having their hair washed, the water would turn as red as blood. Other people claimed that when they looked in the mirror, they would catch glimpses of a ghostly figure standing behind them. When they turned around, there would be no one there. Because of these events, the salon developed a bad reputation and began to lose customers. Eventually, they were forced to close down. The building's owner tried to rent the 4th floor out to other businesses, but when they found out what had happened, nobody would take it. Finally, the owner reduced the price to nearly nothing, and it was rented by a businessman who planned to open a stationery supply store. However, when they tried to do some renovations on the floor, there was a series of mysterious accidents. The workmen's tools would sometimes disappear, only to be found in strange places. A large mirror suddenly shattered when nobody was near it, and a workman had his hand crushed when the elevator closed unexpectedly. Eventually, the workmen were so spooked that they refused to continue. The building's owner gave up trying to rent the 4th floor out and just shut it down. He had the buttons in the elevator replaced, and it was reprogrammed that nobody could go on the 4th floor. At least that's what's supposed to happen. For some reason, when people took the elevator, it would sometimes stop on the 4th floor, and when the doors opened, some people would see a figure coming toward them in the darkness. I honestly still don't know what that was. I'm someone who goes on the deep and dark web constantly. It's not what people think, where it's evil and overpopulated with crazy people. That's only a small percentage of the dark web. Years ago, my girlfriend broke up with me, and I put her personal information on a forum, and soon after that, she disappeared. It's been a while since that happened, and I've ran into people that have disrespected me since. I'm not an intimidating guy, nor do I look intimidating, nor do I ever have physical or verbal conflicts. I always think to myself that these people don't know what could happen to them. I work at a fast food restaurant, and at the time of this story, my manager was really on my case about everything. I would be late, mess up orders, have an attitude with customers, and some other stuff I could name, but it's so much. I understood that I was messing up, but the tone that this guy would talk to me embarrassed me in front of my coworkers, and sometimes in front of customers. One day, though, that was the last straw. So one day I walked into work, 5 minutes before I was due to clock in, and my manager out loud said that the window liquor is finally on time, in front of customers and my coworkers. Everyone laughed at me. During my whole shift that night, he would direct smart comments toward me, while still yelling at me for everything that I did wrong. I made up my mind. I was going to find that forum and give his information. On my walk home, I was going back and forth with myself about whether to do it or not. By the time I made it home, I made up my mind. I didn't shower nor did I change clothes. I went straight to my laptop and I searched. I possibly clicked maybe 100 links because on the dark web there are links that will take you down any rabbit hole. A link named Pork Chop piqued my interest. When I clicked it, I was directed to an About page. It only said 6 words. We find it, we chop it. And another link that said, here's an example of what we do. I clicked it, of course. As soon as I clicked on it, the picture went to the point of view from an old school camera, with the date and time in the corner of the screen. The person behind the camera approached the man and followed him. A few minutes go by, and the man noticed what was happening. He turned around and approached the camera while yelling and screaming at the person for following him. Then all of a sudden, you see 5 huge guys dressed in black wearing a pig mask run from behind the man and drag him into the dark. The person holding the camera turns the camera to his or her face and leaves it there for about 5 to 10 minutes. That person also wore a pig mask, but all you could hear was the man screaming and sounds that I don't want to describe in the background. The camera was then turned back around and the sight that I saw was disturbing. It was something that no one would ever want to see. Some people say that they wouldn't wish it on their worst enemy, but I did. After the video was over, there were links. One said pork and the other said chop. I clicked on the pork and it prompted me to put in a code. I didn't have one, so I backed out. So I clicked on chop. There was information that needed to be filled out, like name, height, description, and place. I filled out all the info for my manager. And the place, it was my job. I submitted the form. At the end of the screen, it said, see you soon. 4 days later, while at work, my manager approached me and decided to apologize for the way he treated me, and offered to give me more hours and said that he will work with me more often because he sees potential in me. A few hours later, it was close to the end of the night. My manager helped me with the trash and took it out for me. As I were putting chairs on top of the table getting ready to mop, I looked outside and saw my manager looking over at something, but he looked worried. I moved to get a better look and I saw what he was looking at. He was surrounded by 6 people in a pig mask with weapons in their hands. I ran outside as they swarmed him, except for one person. He had a camera. I forgot all about these guys, and then I put his information on the website. I ran outside as they approached him. He looked at me for help, but I ran back inside and called the police. It took them 10 minutes to get there. When I looked back outside, what I saw was the most disgusting thing I've ever seen. I wish I could get the image out of my head. Between the time of me initially seeing them, calling the cops, and running back outside, these guys were gone. But my manager was still there. I went to his funeral the next week. The next day I received an anonymous email that had the whole video. They were watching him this whole time he was on shift. I don't know how they got my email. I never provided any of my information. Till this day, I still feel sick because my manager was starting to be nice to me that day. I can't go back on the dark web.
This happened to my older brother. When he was a college student, he joined a mountain climbing club. One day, he went climbing in the high mountains located in South Korea with 3 of his club members. The mountain was so high up that they couldn't climb all the way up in just a day, so they decided to stop by one of the mountain cabins in the mountainside and take a rest. It was a 2-story cabin, and unfortunately, the electricity was disconnected that day. Well, you know, people usually don't go to sleep early on days like that. So my brother and his friends drank a lot of alcohol, turned on a flashlight, and accidentally lit it up towards the wall. On the wall, there were framed pictures of the 1st, 2nd, and other mountain guards. Everyone was giggling because of the face in one of the pictures. Then they fell asleep. The next morning, when my brother woke up, he noticed that 2 of the club members had already gone down the mountain, and there was only one left behind. He had fainted, and froth was coming out of his mouth. He looked around in confusion, wondering what was going on. He saw something he could not believe. The cabin was surrounded by small windows. Well then, what the heck was there last night if what they thought were photo frames were actually windows?
My cousin used to work at a police station, and this incident is about one of his colleagues' experiences. One day, he received a call from a gas station worker that he had been robbed, and the robbery escaped shortly before he called the police. He asked the worker if he could describe the suspect, and to his surprise, he said that the person was in fact a woman. With a white dress, and she has very long dark hair, and also she was beautiful, he said. At first, she came to ask for help because she got lost in the middle of the night. So I went to the office looking for my boss and told him what had happened. We then went back to the cashier together, but when we came in, she was no longer there, and all the banknotes were also not in the cash box. Since he was the only one on duty that night, he headed to the spot of the incident right away. As he drove toward the gas station, he soon entered a darkened section of the highway that was surrounded by forest. He was driving in the middle of a gloomy highway until he noticed that a woman in a white dress with a very beautiful looking was walking along the road in the opposite direction. He passed her accidentally, so he began to slow down the car and turned to check again if she's the person that the worker had described to him before. Then he turned the car in her direction, stopped next to her, and got out of the car immediately. "Ma'am, I need you to get on the car right now." As they were driving to the police station, he asked her some basic questions like why she had to steal the money or something else. However, the woman didn't say any word to all the questions while she was sitting in the back seat. She just looked at one point all the time until they arrived at the police station. Her behavior was pretty weird, so he thought that the woman might have some kind of mental problem. He then decided that he would not have any further conversations with her. When they arrived at the police station, they started to investigate her, and all of a sudden, she said that she would return the money the next day if they let her spend a night in a prison cell. Because she kept insisting that she had nowhere to go, he and other cops were confused by her comment. But they could nothing to do, actually, so they eventually approved of her proposal, letting her spend one night. The other police then called the gas station and informed the workers that they had captured the person, and they would return the money for tomorrow. The next day, he went to visit the woman they had detained yesterday. However, he was stunned as soon as he had arrived at the prison cell. In the cell, they found that her roommate's face was all scratched, and his body was hung from a wall nail. And the bills, which they didn't see yesterday, were all tucked in his pockets roughly. The wall next to him was painted in blood, saying, "I'm returning my debt." What made him even more frightened was that the woman completely vanished. He went to the director, informed this, and they had a search around the area widely, but she was nowhere. Even today, everyone in the police is traumatized by this incident. And that's what my cousin told me. How could anyone escape from a prison cell avoiding the cameras recording or anything? Eventually, they never found out what had happened that day and where she is now.